You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. In today's episode, we are spotlighting a trailblazing scientist, communicator, and advocate for STEM education. Joining us is Dr. Ainissa Ramirez, an award-winning scientist, author, and passionate science communicator who has dedicated her career to making science accessible and exciting for everyone. From her groundbreaking work in material science to her acclaimed book, The Alchemy of Us, Ainissa reveals how technology has shaped the human experience and why science education is more important than ever. Welcome to the podcast, Ainissa.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, so excited to have you here on the podcast today. And there are so many things I have to ask you and want to talk to you about. And I thought maybe the best place to kick things off was to talk about what first inspired your love for science. Was there a specific moment or a person who maybe sparked your interest?
I like science since I was very young. In fact, my mom says that when I was 4, I said I wanted to be a scientist. And I think that I got the idea from my love from taking things apart and asking lots of questions. And somewhere along the line, I heard that that's what scientists do. And what really put me on the path to becoming a scientist was a television program on PBS called 3-2-1 Contact, where I saw kids solving problems. One of the kids was an African-American girl. And when I found out what they were doing was what scientists do, ask questions and follow their curiosity, then I was like, well, this is what I want to do. So I think the television show and just my love for taking things apart were the cocktail that made me want to become a scientist.
Did you ever get any of those things back together? Or were they always just apart?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I took things apart. Sometimes there were extra parts when I put them back together. But fortunately, I didn't get in trouble. I think my parents just realized that, she's just curious. And it wasn't like a major thing, like a toaster or anything. It was something small. But sometimes it worked out, but sometimes I just had extra pieces and I was like, what do I do with these?
Oh, that's hilarious. But you went on to get involved in material science, which I know I've heard you talk a lot about, is kind of like your home state of New Jersey. It's stuck between Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, New York. And, material science is between chemistry and physics. And you've had an amazing career with material science. And you've been at Bell Labs and Yale as well. So talk a little bit about how your experiences at both those places as a material science shaped your perspective on science and technology.
Well, that's a great question. And yes, as you say, material science is like the stepchild of sciences. But I absolutely love it because I was told when I was taking early classes that everything that you understand has to do with the interaction of atoms. And I just found that breathtaking, that if you understand how atoms operate, that you can guess how a material will behave. I just thought that was amazing. So that's what put me on the path of becoming a material scientist. And I wanted to study, I found that out towards the end of my undergraduate career, and I wasn't quite ready to work because I had just found something that was just so riveting. So I went on to graduate school and, as you say, went on to work at Bell Laboratories. And that was fantastic. Bell Laboratories was like being a kid in a candy store. Anything you wanted to know, the expert was down the hallway. Or any tool that you need, well, that was probably in another building. Or, it was really just a place to glorify the mind and exercise the mind. And I was thrilled. I would be there early because I couldn't wait to get there. And I would leave late because I didn't really want to go home. I really, really loved it. And it was there where I developed my skills as a researcher. I worked with people who had written papers in science and nature. So it was like finishing school for me, from my graduate school to the next level. And when I went to Yale, that's where I learned how to be more of an independent researcher. So they were both good for my evolution as a scientist.
It sounds like the Bell Labs job was like the absolute perfect first job for you. You couldn't have gotten any better.
In fact, I was in California and I was pretty convinced that I was going to stay in California. Once you go to school in California, you move to California, nobody wants to leave. But Bell Laboratories was hiring, and it was the first time they were hiring in like years. And so I applied. I applied for a postdoc position, and they hired me as a member of technical staff, so as a staff scientist. And I was like, you have to go. I mean, you have to. This is where the transistor was born. You have to go. And so I didn't really want to go because I had promised I would never go back to New Jersey. That's my home state. But when Bell Labs beckons, you got to go. And it was the best move. It was the best move for me.
Well, one of the things I mentioned in your bio during the introduction was that you've written an award-winning book, The Alchemy of Us, which focuses on how 8 inventions have shaped humanity. And as a patent attorney, I thought it was an amazing read. I loved it. And, it's, as I mentioned, award-winning. It won the 2021 Brown University Book Award, the Smithsonian Magazine's 10 Best Science Books Award of 2020, Amazon's Best Science Books Award, amongst many others. So tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write the book. I mean, from things I read about you, I think there might have been some glass blowing that was involved.
Yeah, definitely some glass blowing. I think I'm a little unusual in terms of a material scientist because I always want to share how important this field is with other people. And as I said, it's this stepchild field and people don't know what it is. And it takes some doing to explain what it is. And I wanted to share how important this field was. And I thought that the best way to do that was to show the impact of materials on humanity, on us, how it's changed us. So we create these materials, but then these materials in turn shape us. And where I got that idea was from a glassblowing class, because I was going to write a book that was going to be each chapter was a different material, and I was just going to tell you everything I knew about that material. And it might have been a boring book. I think I would have loved it, but I don't think a lot of other people would have loved it. But when I went to this glassblowing class in a bad mood and had an accident because of my bad mood, and then after that accident was actually in a good mood because I was happy to be alive, I did a quick check and I said, well, what made that happen? Well, it was the glass. I shaped the glass. I had the accident with the glass, and it actually shaped me. And that's what was the origin story of the book. I said, I'm going to, instead of just cataloging all these different materials and writing a book that might be interesting to some people, but might not, let me share with you how materials shaped us in ways that you wouldn't expect, how they gave rise to the birth of Christmas, how they changed our bodies, how they changed how we think. And so that this little known field, material science, which has always been the stepchild, doesn't feel like a small thing anymore. It feels like it's important to know.
Yeah, and that really comes through in the book because, as I mentioned, you focus on 8 inventions, clocks, steel rails, copper communication cables, photographic film, light bulbs, hard disks, scientific labware, silicon chips. What made you focus on those? How did you end up picking those out of the universe of different inventions you could have chosen?
That is a great question. Yeah, because there's 10,000, there's 100,000 different materials that I could have chosen from. But I wanted each chapter, there's a formula to it, although it's not completely obvious. But I wanted to have something from history that was made possible because that material existed or because that material didn't exist. And then I wanted to be able to tell you the origin story of the invention made possible by that material. And then I wanted to share with the impact of that material. So each material had to have each one of those things. So that really culled it down. That really made the numbers smaller. And I wanted the stories to be impactful. I didn't want to just tell something that, you could say at the water cooler and people would be like, that's kind of interesting. I wanted to show how Lincoln's body was shuttled across the United States using iron rails, and how that was a great connector, and how iron rails went eventually to steel rails and actually connected the country. So I wanted to be a little bit more poetic. So that really reduced it down to 8 different inventions.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. Each of the chapters has just such incredible history and stories, and it's fascinating. So I'm curious, which of the technologies you wrote about really surprised you the most in terms of the impact on human behavior? I can tell you there were 2 that I really liked. It was the very first chapter on clocks and Ruth Belville and her little clock, Arnold, and selling time, that whole story. And also the chapter 3 on Samuel Morse and how tragedy ended up bringing us the Morse code. How about you? What surprised you?
Yeah, well, I love them all, of course, for different reasons. For me, it was the adventure of writing the book that So I'm looking at the chapters a little differently. It's not only just consuming, it's like, oh yeah, I had to go to these different places to get the information. But I think the chapter that really touched me was the last one, which was called Think. And it's how computers are actually altering the way we think. The bottom line is that if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you don't do deep thinking, you don't do deep reading, well, your brain becomes accustomed to looking at things at the surface. So we're actually shaped by our technologies. If we're just on the internet, using social media, just clicking on things and not taking a deep dive, well, your brain gets accustomed to that because our brains are plastic, meaning that they can be modified. And we learn not to think deeply. And I was like, wow, the technology is actually shaping the thing that's most personal to us, which is our brains. Like our brains make us us. So I that was the last chapter, and that kind of sends the reader off to think more about technology. But I just thought that was very important for people to know about.
Any plans to update the book as, technology is changing really fast? There's a lot of new inventions coming out. We have AI. Any thoughts on that front?
That's a good question. So I wrote the book as a preamble to AI. I said, look, if we can look at simple technologies that you can wrap your head around, like heating up a wire so that it glows and making a light bulb, that's a technology that you might be able to understand how it works. Or the telegraph, which is the shutting on and off of electricity, with long and short dashes. If we can understand how simple technologies shaped us, then this prepares us to ask questions about technologies that we're not going to be fully able to understand, such as AI. So I think the book is, set the way it is. It looks at older technologies. I don't think there's going to be more Alchemy of Us. I think that this book was enough to show that if you look at old technologies and they had the ability to shape us, then the technologies that are on the horizon are certainly going to do the same thing.
Well, keeping on this theme as technology shaping not just what we do, but who we are, can you give some more examples of that dynamic in action?
Well, something simple like a light bulb, which we think is pretty innocuous. If I were to give you a lecture on the light bulb, I would be like, this is on and this is off, class dismissed. But what I learned while writing The Alchemy of Us is that the lights actually shape our health. Our bodies have two modes, a daytime mode and a nighttime mode. And how our bodies know what mode to be in is based on the type of light. So when we have bluer light, from a compact fluorescent bulb or a blue LED or from the sun, our bodies are in daytime mode. And when we have a redder light, our bodies go into a rest or repair mode. But most of us live under artificial light, and we may not particularly be careful with what kind of temperature it is, if it's a bluer light or a red light. So if we have a bluer light, then we're in growth mode all the time. And as a result of it, our cells are going to respond and they're going to grow, not necessarily in ways that we want. And so it ends up that there's a segment of people who have health issues based on when they work. They're shift workers and they're working underneath the blue fluorescent lights. I didn't know about that. So this is where something that's innocuous, this light bulb, actually is a great driver for our health. And so I thought that was important for people to know, because I had no idea that light bulbs, that our bodies were so sensitive to the type of light that was around us.
That's really fascinating. I never knew that as well. Very, very interesting. We're celebrating Black History Month now, and I wanted to know what your thoughts are on increasing representation of Black professionals in the STEM field. I mean, you obviously mentioned the influence of 3-2-1 contact on you, but I'm curious, what can we do to increase the number of Black professionals in STEM?
Well, from a corporation point of view, it's been proven many, many times that diverse groups make better solutions. People with a range of backgrounds can see things differently, and so they build things that are much more robust. I mean, that's from a corporate point of view. If you want to make more money, have a more diverse group of people solving that problem. And how we attract people, what worked for me is that I saw my reflection in a television program. And so you don't know that something is possible unless you see it. So it's very important for us to have mentoring, even if it's a fictitious character on a television. But we also need to enrich our talent. So we need to support people who are interested in STEM. Maybe they don't have a strong background, so maybe they take additional courses. I remember doing that long ago. I took courses on Saturdays back at Stevens Tech many, many years ago because the school I went to was a good school for Jersey City, but it wasn't necessarily a good school on the national level. And so they prepared us that way. So there's the rules or the tricks to improve the representation are all in place. What needs to happen is that they need to be supported and they need to have some longevity. It can't be based on this professor created this program, this professor moves on, and then this program dies. It has to be like part of the university. And I think that would be key.
And I'm curious, throughout your career, what barriers have you seen for underrepresented groups in science? And do you have some thoughts on how we can break some of those barriers down?
Those barriers are ever present, and they exist, on different scales. I call it like death by 1,000 cuts. Someone sees your name and they make an assumption. My last name is Ramirez. I remember once I was writing a paper with some colleagues who were of Chinese and of Japanese descent. We wrote this paper. There's 4 names, so none of them look like quote unquote American names. And the referee wrote back and said, a native speaker should write this paper. Now, I wrote the paper and I only speak English, so I don't know what he was talking about. But the fact that those kinds of things happen, this person didn't even read the paper. So these things happen. But Toni Morrison says what the function of racism is, the serious function of racism is a distraction. And when I learned that, then I realized that I should not take things personally and that you just continue to do your work. So yes, there's definitely some barriers, but that should never stop you from doing the work that you need to do.
So I know you're passionate about making science accessible to everyone. In fact, I believe I saw someone refer to you as a science evangelist. Why do you think science education is critical, especially now?
Science is very critical in the age that we live in, which is technology is everywhere. So it's very important for people to have an understanding of the things that are around them so that they can make decisions for themselves and not be controlled by those technologies. And when I say it's important to know science, I don't mean just the facts, like the human head is 8 pounds. I don't mean that. I mean the other softer skills that are within science, critical thinking, being curious. Those are the things that I think are very important. Learning the facts, you can easily get the facts from Google. But knowing how to put those facts together, knowing to think for yourself, those are the skills that we need even more these days. And so that's why I believe that science is a great exercising space for us to learn how to do that.
So how do we get more people, children and adults, excited about science in an era when things are just changing so incredibly rapidly?
Well, that's a good question. I think what we need to do is just tell really good stories and make the material accessible to people in a way that's relevant to them. You don't just tell people something because it's interesting to you. You have to really meet people where they are and share the science facts that they will need. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a book about football. I'm not a big football fan, but I learned that more people watch the Super Bowl than vote. I said, that's a lot of people. So why don't I write about science in a way that's relevant to people who focus on football? So let me embed science into football. So that's what I mean, bringing science to people where they are. And I think that's probably very key to making people understand how important science is.
So I want to keep talking about storytelling because you're an amazing storyteller. And tell us a little bit about the role that storytelling plays when you communicate about science.
Science is a story, but we don't share it as a story. We share it as facts. That's what textbooks do. Here's a fact. Here's another fact. Here's another fact. But if you found out that this person had to do something crazy to get that fact, well, now that fact is now sticky. It's stickier. It stays in your head because you have context for what's going on. And so that's what I do as a science storyteller. There's some facts that I want to get across, but I know that the best way to do that is to use stories as a conveyor belt to get that information across. And as a scientist, of course, I want to share with you every single fact that I could about the material. But when you're writing a story, you have to make sure that what you're offering actually serves the story, because the story is the most important thing. So stories are wonderful conveyor belts, and they're stickier than just science facts.
How do you think tech transfer professionals can use storytelling to better communicate the importance of their work to a wider audience?
Well, tech transfer people are well positioned to know what the good stories are because they see things not only as the facts, the science, the concept, but how it's useful. And if you can relay that to an audience, then they're going to be fascinated. So if, and it has to be stories that resonate with people in different ways. So, the Gatorade story for football lovers, that's a wonderful tech transfer story. But there's other nuggets that I'm sure that people will have that they should start off with that. Don't make a compelling case. Tell me a good story and then make a case.
So looking back at your career, is there any particular moment or achievement that stands out to you that's particularly rewarding?
I've been very fortunate that, and maybe it's because my brain pivots, but the thing that's in front of me is the most exciting thing or the most important thing right now. Of course, getting into undergrad was very significant for my family because I was like the first generation to get into college. But each step after that was also equally compelling and equally useful. So I tend to think of achievement as like, what's the next thing I'm doing? How am I growing in the next way? That's how I usually think about things.
And if you were speaking to a young scientist who's starting their journey today, what guidance or wisdom would you want to share?
I would say, don't study alone. Courses are usually designed for people to work in groups. Get a tutor. I had lots of tutors. I don't care how smart you are. Always get a tutor because it'll only make things better. And ask lots of questions. Just be brave and ask questions. No one's going to think you're stupid. In fact, someone's going to be so grateful that you asked that question because they had the same question.
Absolutely. So what is next for you as you look towards the future? Are there any new projects or ideas that you're especially excited about diving into?
Well, I always like to challenge myself. I don't know what that's all about, but I do like to challenge myself. So I wrote The Alchemy of Us, which was a challenging book. But I said, I would really love to be able to explain science to the youngest members of society. And so I have a series of children's books that are coming out that some of them are about inventors, particularly Black inventors, but some are concepts like how atoms make friends, which is about chemical bonding. And I find these books to be even more challenging because here you are where you have to explain something to the youngest audience and share science in a way that resonates with them. So that's kind of what I'm embarking on right now, writing a series of children's books.
How many are you working on?
How many am I working on? I'm always working on something. There are 5 that are in the publishing pipeline, but I've written way more than that. It's just a matter of finding a home for them.
Oh, that's pretty impressive. So when will we see these children's books coming out?
The first one is called Spark. It will come out October 2025. And then there'll be one every year until about 2028.
Wow, congratulations. That's really exciting.
Thank you so much.
And Ainissa, this has been really great having the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you so much for spending time with us and for sharing all the excellent work that you're doing.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Ainissa, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your incredible insights on the interplay between technology and humanity. Your passion for science education and innovation is truly inspiring. For our listeners, if you haven't already, I highly recommend picking up a copy of The Alchemy of Us. It's a fascinating read that will change how you think about the technologies we often take for granted. To learn more about Ainissa and her work, visit her website or check out her podcast, Science Underground. Thank you for listening to Autumn on the Air. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your network. Until next time, keep innovating and making an impact.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.